Spending the majority of my time in a middle school classroom, you can imagine how often I have to navigate the extremes. It may sound hard to believe, but middle schoolers have really big feelings. A new relationship always means true love, but a breakup is the end of the world. A new hit song is either the greatest of all time or just complete trash. These absolutes and extremes even permeate trivial topics and questions. If you want to have the most fierce debate of your life, just ask a middle schooler if a hot dog is a sandwich. I promise you won't regret it. Oftentimes, they even take a personal opinion and fabricate reasons why it's the only right answer. Truthfully, this is something we all do, regardless of our age. I mean, just think about your favorite color. It's likely something you've known since early childhood, and there is no doubt that to you, it's the best color. For me, it's purple. Lavender, lilac, periwinkle, and plum, I love them all. I love how a deep shade can be elegant, powerful, and regal, but a more pastel shade can be soft, delicate, and gentle. If it were up to me, the entire world would be purple. And if that were true, I think it would be a much better place to live. But according to scientists, my favorite color doesn't even exist. When we analyze the visual color spectrum, purple is nowhere to be found. It's known as a non-spectral color, which just means that in all of the wavelengths of light that humans can see, purple is missing. In fact, the color we call purple is just a trick that our brains play on us when we see both red and blue wavelengths at the same time. Collectively, we've just decided that this combination of red and blue is something entirely different and worthy of its own title. Purple is a type of nuance that is both red and blue, but it's also neither. That nuance is something else I witness in my classroom each and every day. I know this may sound counterintuitive considering how often middle schoolers live in manufactured opposites, blind to the subtleties. I mean, in fact, all humans are hardwired this way to simplify the world around them into binaries this or that, black or white, red or blue, good or bad. These cognitive shortcuts we create by separating the world into distinct opposing categories could have very well been the key to our survival as a species. Having the ability to make a quick decision could have meant the difference between life and death when our primary goal was to avoid falling prey to that big, scary world out there. But in modern society, this biological imperative to simplify and classify gets applied to ourselves and to our neighbors, which creates conflict and divides us further and further apart. That mechanism in our brains that's designed to distinguish between safe and dangerous has been hijacked to separate us from them. But imagine if we decided that these opposing categories could be shifted into something more nuanced, in the same way that we perceive red and blue as something new. What if instead of seeing the world in red and blue, we decided to see each other as purple? I want to introduce you to a student of mine that inspired me to think this way. I met Jose as a sophomore in my world history class all the way back in 2014. I was still a new teacher, so my focus was largely on figuring out how to just be a teacher. Jose came into my classroom and he stood out instantly. He was joyous and quick-witted. He had a laugh that, to be honest, was frustratingly contagious as a young teacher just trying to get 16-year-olds to learn history. But that wasn't the only reason Jose stood out. Jose didn't fit into a single category or label that you would have used to describe students at our school. Jose was Hispanic, while the vast majority of his peers were white. His family were immigrants to the country, while his classmates' families had gone back generations in that county and at school even. Jose was also openly gay in a rural county in Kentucky, which caused him to further stand out from his peers. Now, despite being so different from them, he rarely acknowledged it or let it affect him publicly. When students would make mean comments directed at him, he had his wit and a really tight-knit group of friends that were always there to support him. as his teacher, I really never felt the need to interject or even discuss it because it just always felt like it was handled. Jose passed my class, and over the course of the next 2 years, I would see him in the halls being the same silly, goofy kid I had known through that year. And then one day, I got a call saying that Jose had taken his life. This beautiful light to everyone who had the privilege to know him was extinguished. Quite frankly, I wasn't sure how to move forward as a teacher. I'd never experienced anything like that before. This student who I'd grown to love and care about was just gone. In my unknowing and in my grief, I decided to leave education. I really just wasn't sure if I could do that feeling again. Mostly, I wasn't sure if I could have done something differently to make Jose know how much he was genuinely loved and appreciated. Almost immediately after leaving the classroom, though, I knew I had made a mistake. Teaching was a part of me, and despite the heartbreak of losing Jose, I knew that I had to find a way back into the classroom. I spent the next year reflecting on my interactions with Jose and with all of my students. In that time, I thought a lot about the things that isolated them and how I could show them how to be more kind, more caring, more supportive of each other. If I could teach them that if we found nuance in each other, we would never be alone. To show what I mean more clearly, let's take a trip into my current middle school classroom in the suburbs of northern Kentucky. Early in our school year, I introduced this concept of nuance to my students through one of my favorite children's books called My Shadow is Purple by Scott Stewart. In this story, every person has a shadow that follows them around. Blue if they're a boy, pink if they're a girl. As the main character discovers their own shadow, they realize there's a problem. Here's a page of that book. My dad has a shadow that's blue as a berry, and my mom's is as pink as a blossoming cherry. There are only those choices, a 2 or a 1, but mine is quite different. It's both, and it's none. If theirs are straight, then mine is a circle. For my shadow's different. My shadow's purple. Throughout this entire story, every adult the child encounters tells them over and over that they must choose a blue shadow or a pink shadow. But the child's confused because they enjoy activities that are associated with both. At the climax of this book, the child's faced with a crucial decision. Which side of the gym do they stand during the school dance? The pink side or the blue side? The teacher even comes up and says to the child, I know you're different, but now you must choose. And rather than giving in to that social pressure, the child stays true to themselves and declares defiantly, if I cannot be purple, then I cannot stay. This declaration becomes a solidifying moment of acceptance when other students throughout the gym announce that they too have shadows that are more complex than the 2 provided. And while the author uses shadows to describe gender, and the book's intent is ultimately for kids to celebrate themselves and be true to their identity, the underlying message to my students is much larger. We're all labeled and placed into categories, sometimes by ourselves and sometimes by others. But the truth is, we're also all more complex than that. Like the child in the story, we're both and we're none. While I may have a lot of labels, none of them completely define me, and the same is true for each and every one of my students. Without nuance, we only see each other as the labels we're assigned, reducing us, destroying our ability to see ourselves in each other, and ultimately setting the stage for division. Instead, I urge my students to find the purple in each other. Now, as a disclaimer, I don't want you to think I'm advocating that these defining characteristics that lead to our labels should be erased or ignored either. To do so would be naive and counterinstructive to seeing the world in purple. But the reality is, we all carry our identities with us everywhere we go. I would argue we should even carry them with pride. These parts of us matter. They make us amazing and unique, but they are not the entirety of who we are. We should not classify anyone by these characteristics alone for fear of oversimplification and apathy toward one another. But as we move through the school year, students get to learn how to challenge that kind of binary thinking that leads to apathy and divisiveness. Now, rather than just tell you about it, I'd love to show you another example from my classroom. I'm going to give you a series of questions, and despite them all being middle school questions, I want you to answer them with me. There are no tricks. No one's going to judge you if you don't know the answer. I promise it's safe here. You ready? All right. Number one, who was the general of the Continental Army during the American Revolution? Well, George Washington, of course, right? That was an easy one. That's a softball. What about this next one? Was Washington a hero? Now, this is an opinion question, but I think most Americans would agree that yes, Washington was a hero. And I know that nearly every middle school textbook says the same. At the end of the American Revolution, did the United States ban slavery? Unfortunately, no. It would take another 89 years before slavery would be abolished with the passing of the 13th Amendment. Was American slavery evil? Okay, this is an obvious one here. Of course, yes, American slavery was fundamentally evil. Did George Washington enslave people? Again, yes. At the time of his death, Washington claimed ownership of 123 people, with another couple hundred living on his estate at Mount Vernon. So is George Washington a hero? When we learn about history, we learn about the details, which, for simplicity's sake, we'll just call facts. And we seek to make sense of the past, which we'll call opinions. Depending on who's telling the story, which portion of the story we're studying, and what our purposes for sharing the story are, these facts and opinions blend together and become nearly impossible to separate. History is really messy this way, and history teachers have the responsibility to help make sense of these messy questions. Nevertheless, I want my students to understand that every person, no matter how famous or ordinary, is as complex as every other, including themselves. Studying this complexity requires nuance of thought. Sometimes we need the red and blue labels to help us build a foundation of learning, but more often than not, it's the purple that's closer to the truth. I don't have to speculate about the power this has for students. I see it every single year. Students learn that they are more than the labels they're assigned, and therefore, so is everyone else. They begin to see each other more clearly and completely, and realize that despite their differences, they have so much more in common. These differences become celebrations instead of conflicts because they grow their capacity for empathy and understanding. They get to see parts of themselves in each other, which allows them to care more deeply for one another. I often wonder what my classroom could have been like earlier in my career had I understood this phenomenon more clearly. I wonder about my students who went about their days with a smile despite feeling isolated and alone because they didn't fit in with any of the labels they saw around them. And truthfully, I wonder about Jose. I wonder what impact a purple classroom would have had on him. When we see the world as purple, we work more effectively with each other to solve problems. We grow compassion and empathy toward each other. We improve democratic discourse and consider more diverse perspectives in our decision making. Seeing the world in purple shows us that you are me and I am you, and that no group or label can truly define any of us. Embracing nuance can help us move beyond these labels to build empathy and create unity in a divided world. As I leave this stage, I want to tell you what I wish I could go back and tell each and every single one of my students. You matter. You are a light of incomprehensible brightness that deserves to be shared with the world. I hope that you have the courage to go out and see that brightness in each other. Thank you.